Good afternoon, it's me, Teacher Mike from Phuket PALS. Welcome back to another GED Social Studies video here. In this one, we're going to be going through most of a full test. I can't promise I'll go through the whole thing. I might get called away or something like that, but I'll get through as much as I can in the time and give you an idea of what might be on the test for you, what the questions look like, and the standard of reading comprehension, vocabulary, and all of that type of stuff. Okay, so let's get stuck in. You can see question one is multiple choice, A, B, C, or D, and it's based on this short paragraph here. Now, when you see these short paragraphs like this, you know you're going to have to read it very, very closely. Now, what do I mean by reading closely? Well, I mean, what I mean by that is that you're reading with very, very close attention to the detail in the paragraph. You're not just scanning through and hoping to pick out bits of information. When you read closely, you're reading all the details, absorbing them, and then making sure you totally comprehend what is in that box. So let's see. The question itself says, which statement describes the relationship discussed in the paragraph? Which statement describes the relationship discussed in the paragraph? So we're looking for the relationship. Let's see. After some difficult years, this year was a good one for a major automobile company. The company still owes the US government $250 million it borrowed during the recent recession. However, it'll be able to repay some of the debt early. This was unexpected because new safety regulations made vehicles more expensive to produce. Customers, though, enjoy the added safety features and are willing to pay a slightly higher price for the vehicles. Additionally, a redesign of the company's best-selling truck is popular. Sales of the truck are up 20% and overall profits are up 15% on last year. Okay, so we see better times for an automobile company. It's a company, as we know from this paragraph, that it must have gone through some hard times in the recession, borrowed some money off the government, and then it seems to be doing much better. Although there are some government regulations which are adding cost to their production, to the production of their cars. Let's see. Which statement describes the relationship discussed in the paragraph? As sales have increased, the number of safety regulations have increased. As safety regulations have increased, the company's debt has increased. As profits have increased, customer satisfaction has increased. As sales have increased, company profits have increased. So which of these four does the paragraph describe? Okay. Okay. Right, so as sales have increased, the number of safety regulations have increased. So it starts out by talking about the money borrowed by the government, and it'll be repaying the debt soon. This was unexpected because of new safety regulations. Okay, and making the cars more expensive to produce. Customers, though, enjoy the added safety features and are willing to pay a slightly higher price for the vehicles. Additionally, the redesign of the company's best-selling truck is popular. Sales are up 20% and overall profits are up 15% from last year. Okay, so we can see here, as sales have increased, the number of safety regulations has increased. Well, it's not that, because it tells us here that the safety regulations came after the money was borrowed from the government. And they've started repaying that money as well. So it's not A. As safety regulations have increased, the company's debt has increased. Well, their debt hasn't increased because they're actually paying it back regardless of those safety regulations. As profits have increased, so customer satisfaction has increased. Well, it doesn't talk about customer satisfaction in the paragraph, so it must be D. Okay. As sales have increased, company profits have increased. And we can see that here. Sales of the truck are up 20%. And overall profits are up 15% from last year. Okay, we get the answer in that last sentence. Yeah, so you can see you do have to read the paragraph quite closely and then use a process of elimination to get closer, because some of the answers seem quite plausible at the time, especially in exam conditions. So make sure you're crossing out the ones that it's definitely not, and then reading even closer to find out, maybe between a 50-50 choice, which one it is. Let's move on. US Supreme Court case regarding school segregation. Okay, so here we have some US Supreme Court cases. And okay, then we have a graph. All right, so just quickly have a look here. In 1952, the US Supreme Court had 5 cases on its docket regarding school segregation. And if you don't know what segregation is, it's separating. In the case of the US, it was separating blacks and whites in public places, in schools and buses, in restaurants and things like that. In 1954, the following cases were combined and heard before the Supreme Court as Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka. Okay, very famous. So here are the 9 court cases. And again, you don't have to know all these. Just make sure you understand what the main idea of the text is about here. Okay, so let's look. Which graph correctly expresses quantitative information from the passage? Okay, if the word that might throw you off there is quantitative information. Quantitative relates to the amount of something, okay, like a number. The amount of something. Like quantitative data is like the amount in total, okay? Not to be confused with qualitative data, which is about the quality. For example, like if you look at qualitative environmental, if you look at like factors affecting standard of living, okay, factors that affect your standard of living. On the one hand, you'd have quantitative, which means like how much money you have, or how many material possessions you own, like cars and watches and all this stuff. Qualitative, on the other hand, is about qualitative standard of living. On the other hand, would be about like the quality of the air, or living conditions in general, environmental factors and things like this. Okay, so which graph correctly expresses quantitative information from the passage? Okay, so we get A, B, C, and D. So let's have a quick look through. So here we have Brown versus Board of Education, Topeka, plaintiffs by state. So does Virginia have over 150? We'll look at that first. Virginia, it does. Okay, so do all the rest have less than 20 or so? Here, 9, 12, 13, 20. It's probably A, actually. It's not South Carolina. Definitely not. South Carolina, 20, so it can't be that. It can't be that. You see, that's over 150. Here, District of Columbia, over 150. District of Columbia, 9, so it can't be that. And D, Virginia, over 150. 163, yes. Okay, and then it could be D. Virginia, over 150. Kansas has more than the others on this graph. Kansas has more than the others. 13. No, South Carolina has 20 there, so it can't be D. Okay, it must be A. Yeah, the answer is A there. Okay, so you can see with these types of questions, you have to read closely. There's also quite a bit of memory involved, remembering the data and then going back and looking at the visual representation of that and then making connections between the data. So yeah, you have to practice these types of questions. And that's kind of what you're looking for. You don't have to get too complicated. Just pick out the major piece of data and then make comparisons with the text. That way, you'll narrow it down to 2 options if you get this type of question again, and then you read more closely and see what the answer is. Okay, the passage summarizes a speech given by John Quincy Adams in 1839, 50 years after the ratification of the US Constitution. Okay, so we have Mr. John Quincy Adams giving a speech. let's see, go straight to the questions. We've got a specific vocab question here. In paragraph 3, what does league mean? League. Okay, we'll go straight to paragraph 3 and save ourselves some time. And then we read closely. According to Adams, the Constitution reflects the ideas of the Declaration of Independence. He explained that it would allow the affairs of the nation to be administered not by a confederacy or mere league of friendship between the sovereign states, or mere league of friendship, a league of friendship. Okay, but by a government. So what is a league of friendship? Level of quality? Probably not. A unit for measuring distance? Definitely not. An association for promoting competition? Probably not relevant. An association of communities with a common interest? Probably D. Let's see again. He explained that it would allow the affairs of the nation to be administered not by a confederacy or a mere league of friendship between the sovereign states, but by a government distributed into 3 great departments, the legislative, the judicial, and the executive. Okay, so I think it is D there. League means an association of communities with a common interest. Okay, number 4. Based on the passage, which statement expresses an assumption behind the Articles of Confederation that is not an assumption behind the US Constitution? Okay, based on the passage, which statement expresses an assumption behind the Articles of Confederation that is not an assumption behind the US Constitution? Okay, let's have a look. Let's just see. Okay, Adams criticized the Articles of Confederation. He explained that the Declaration of Independence represents the will of the American people, while the main principle of the Article of Confederation was the sovereignty of organized power and the independence of the separate or disunited states. Okay, so let's just have a look there. Okay. Adams explained the role of the federal government, stating that under the Constitution, the powers of government should be limited to concerns interesting the whole people, leaving the internal administration of each state to its own constitutional laws. Adams concluded by stating that the Constitution had fulfilled its duty by forming a more perfect union. It had established justice and peace and promoted the general welfare. It secured the blessings of liberty for future generations. Adams hoped people would continue to celebrate the Constitution and its many benefits. Okay. Okay, so based on the passage, which statement expresses an assumption behind the Articles of Confederation that is not an assumption behind the US Constitution? So what we have to figure out here is what the US Constitution stands for. And one of these answers should be something the US Constitution doesn't stand for, and that'll be our answer. So let's read closely. The nature of a national government requires a strict system of organization. I think that would be in the Constitution for sure. The individual states are required to participate in the national government. Okay. The national government requires the cooperation of the states during war. Okay. The independence of the states takes precedent over national concerns. Okay. Let's double check again. Okay, so the main principle of the Article of Confederation was the sovereignty of organized power and the independence of the... Oh, there we are, okay. The sovereignty of organized power and the independence of the separate or disunited states. Okay, so this is what the Articles of Confederation, the main principle here, according to Adams, the sovereignty, so the independence and right to rule of organized power and the independence of the separate United States. So each state should be independent as well. So I would say that is the answer. Yeah, so I would go with D there. The independence of the states takes precedent over national concerns. It doesn't mention anything about war in there. Yeah, Yeah, I would go with D there. The independence of the states takes precedent over national concerns. And we can see that here. The independence of the separate or disunited. Okay, the main principle of the Articles of Confederation are blah, 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 and the independence of the separate or disunited states, which links directly into D, the independence of the states. Okay. 5. Which statement describes how cultural diversity may occur? Which statement describes how cultural diversity may occur? Now, what does cultural diversity mean? Well, it just means, well, cultural diversity is when within a country you have a number of cultures that are different and distinct from each other. So instead of having like a monoculture within a country in which one culture dominates, you would have multiple cultures within that state, that area, and they would coexist together and they'd be very different from each other. Okay, so let's see if we can get anything like that with these answers. Which statement describes how cultural diversity may occur? As people migrate to new regions, they retain characteristics of their native culture. Okay. As people connect through social media, they become familiar with foreign cultures. No. As international relationships require more cooperation, governments learn to respect cultural differences. Okay, remember the answer is how this may occur. How cultural diversity may occur. As local economies become more international, businesses interact with customers from different cultures. Now, I think it's A here. As people migrate to new regions. Migrate just means to move from one area to another. Okay, there's two different types of migration. Migrate is the verb, migration is the noun. There's two different types of migration. You have internal migration and external migration. Internal migration is migration, moving from one place to the next to live within a country, within one country. Okay, so let's say you live in, New York and you go to work in Denver, Colorado. You would move there and you'd live there and you'd work. That would be internal migration. But let's say you lived in New York and then you went to London to live and work. Well, that would be external migration because you're migrating outside your own country. Okay. So as people migrate to new regions, they retain the characteristics of their native cultures. This is how cultural diversity may occur. For sure. We've seen that throughout history. You know, when people move around for work, when they migrate, either within their country or outside their country, they often bring with them their own particular cultural characteristics, which they don't lose immediately when they go to the new place. They retain them, they keep them, you know, like the food they eat, the music they listen to, perhaps the dialect they speak, the religion they have. And this causes cultural diversity to happen. And we've seen that, I'd say, throughout history. Okay, moving on. Number 6. Right, we have a short paragraph in a box again. Question says, which statement identifies the main idea of the passage? Okay, so it's main idea stuff. We need to read it all and figure out kind of what the bird, if there was a bird flying above this little paragraph here looking down, what would the bird's eye view be? What would be the general idea that the bird could pick up from looking at this passage? Let's see. The principles of majority rule and the protection of minority and individual rights are fundamental to democratic government. Majority rule is a way of organizing democratic government. It is also the means of deciding public issues. It is not a method of suppressing minorities. Members of minority groups have the same human rights as every other individual. Those rights include the freedom of speech, religion, and equal protection under the law. Democracies do not view differences in race, ethnicity, and culture as threats, but instead interpret diversity as strength. There are many ways to resolve differences in views and values among majority and minority groups. However, it is clear that by democratic means, societies can uphold the principles of majority rule and minority rights. Okay, so what's the main idea? Democracies must protect the rights of all citizens. Not really. The freedoms guaranteed by law must be expanded. No. The freedoms enjoyed by citizens are threatened. No. democracies are threatened. Sorry, democracies are governed by the will of the majority. Well, that is true, but I don't think that's the main idea. Okay, I think it is A, actually. Okay, the first sentence again. The principles of majority rule. And majority rule, if you don't know what that is, that's just in a democratic system that the party, the political party that gets the majority of the votes is the party in power. So the principles of majority rule and the protection of minority and individual rights are fundamental to democratic government. Okay. Majority rule is a way of organizing the government, democratic government. It means to decide public issues. It's not a method of suppressing minorities. Members have the same human rights as every other individual and have an equal protection under the law. Okay. It's clear by democratic means that societies can uphold the principle of majority rule and minority rights. Yeah, so I think it is A here. Democracies must protect the rights of all citizens. Okay, so it's not just like, think about it. If you live in a democratic country and it has majority rule, well, you might get like 60% of the population at the most voting for one political party, and then they then take power. They then hold power for the next 4 years in the US or 5 years in the UK. That means that a large part of society hasn't actually voted for the majority party. So that means the rest of the population is made up of groups of minorities. And this article is telling us that those minorities' rights must be protected as well. You can't just have a kind of dictatorship of the majority, if that makes sense. So democratic principles such as freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom, equal protection under the law, these must apply to the minorities as well as the people who voted for the majority party. So yeah, A is the answer. Okay. Moving on, number 8. Let's see where we go. More reading on checks and balances. Number 8. Which sentence from the passage expresses a bias of the author? A bias. Now, what is bias? Okay, bias is when you're not being objective. Bias is when you're taking one side or the other with your opinion. You're not taking a step back and looking at both sides evenly and fairly. Your opinion will go to one side or the other. Very often you see this in politics. People have political allegiances for one side. They won't even listen to the other side. And we can see this in contemporary politics today. In the US, it's even having a difference of opinion has become something that you get shouted at for. So people are very strong in their biases these days. Okay, so which sentence from the passage expresses a bias of the author? Okay, let's have a look. Let's see what they are. We might even be able to guess this straight away. A good example of checks and balances at work occurred when Franklin D. Roosevelt was president. Okay, from 1935 to 36, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down 8 programs providing much-needed progressive reforms. Okay, well, that's a fact, isn't it? Okay, that's a fact. So in order to find the bias, we need to find an opinion, a one-sided opinion. So it can't be B, because B is a fact. C, despite strong public approval of President Roosevelt and of his New Deal reforms, the Judicial Procedures Reform Bill of 1937 failed. Okay, well, that's a fact as well. So it can't be that. D, Roosevelt was a Democrat, but even lawmakers in his political party disapproved of the bill. That's a fact as well, I think. Let's just find this bit in the passage here. I want to find A in the passage. Oh, here. Okay, so a good example of checks and balances at work occurred when Franklin D. Roosevelt was president. Yeah, I think that's the bias there. Yeah, because the writers picking out Roosevelt's presidency as a perfect example or a good example of checks and balances. That's definitely his opinion. I'm sure you could pick another president and find an equally good example of checks and balances in action. Let me just double check that again. Definitely not B. Definitely not C. Let's check D again. But even lawmakers in his political party disapproved of the bill. When the chairman of the House Judiciary Program. Okay, so we have here the Democrat Hatton W. Sumners. He was part of the Judiciary Committee, so he is a lawmaker and he opposed the plan. So that's a fact as well. So go with A there. A shows the bias because it's an opinion. Okay, I think that'll do us for this particular session. I hope you found it in some way useful. And yeah, as you can see, there's the new GED test, the 2016 module for social studies is tough enough. And remember, you don't have to know all the facts. You don't have to remember all the dates and all of that stuff, but you do need to have an overview. You don't want certain vocabulary to be a shock to you when you see it in the test, but you need to be thinking critically. You need to be reading closely and reading as quickly as possible, and also eliminating effectively as well. Okay, so that'll do us for today. Have a good one. Thank you. Bye bye.